On the night of the winter festival, my family celebrated my brother's achievement with a huge surprise party, expensive gifts, and a speech about how proud they were of him. Then my mother handed me a small envelope. Inside was an old key and a note written in my grandfather's handwriting. Some things are meant to stay hidden until the right person finds them. Everyone laughed because they thought it was another family joke. They had no idea that tiny envelope was connected to a secret my family had protected for almost 30 years. My name is Claire. I was 28 years old, and for most of my life, I was the person in my family who knew the least. Not because I wasn't smart. Not because I wasn't trusted. But because everyone had decided there were things I was better off never knowing. And 3 months after that winter festival, that forgotten key opened a door that changed everything. By the time my family realized what I had discovered, they were no longer trying to protect me from the truth. They were trying to protect themselves from it. This story begins with something much smaller than a secret. It begins with a feeling I carried my entire life. The feeling that everyone around me knew a different version of my own story. I grew up in a quiet town, a place where everyone knew everyone's business. My parents, Daniel and Rebecca, were respected people. My father owned a small antique shop near the old railway station. My mother volunteered at the community library and knew every family history in town. They were the kind of people everyone trusted. The kind of people neighbors described as honest and kind. And maybe that was why I never questioned the small things that didn't make sense. Because when good people hide something, you convince yourself there must be a good reason. My older brother Ethan was always the center of attention. He was charming, confident, and the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone smile. My parents celebrated every achievement. His first business idea. His first apartment. His promotions. His mistakes. Even his mistakes somehow became proof that he was brave enough to try. I never hated Ethan. That is important. This was never a story about jealousy. I loved my brother. But I always felt like there was a locked room inside my own family, and everyone had a key except me. I was the responsible one. The person who remembered birthdays. The person who checked on relatives. The person who stayed calm when things went wrong. And because I handled everything quietly, people assumed I didn't need anything. That became my role. Claire will figure it out. Claire is strong. Claire doesn't need help. At first, I thought that was a compliment. I thought being independent meant I had won some invisible competition. But eventually I realized something. Sometimes people stop helping you not because they believe in you. Sometimes they stop helping you because they have become comfortable watching you carry everything alone. The first strange thing happened when I was 19. I found an old photograph inside my grandfather's study. It was hidden behind a row of books. The picture showed my grandfather standing beside a woman I had never seen before. On the back, there was one sentence. Some promises last longer than people. I asked my mother about it. She looked at the photo for a moment. Then she took it from my hand and placed it back inside the drawer. That's just something from the past, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. That was what bothered me. It sounded careful. Like she was choosing every word. I asked who the woman was. My mother simply said. Someone who no longer matters. But years later, I would learn that was the first lie. Because that woman mattered more than anyone could imagine. For years, I forgot about the photograph. Life moved forward. I finished school. I built a career. I moved into my own apartment in Fairhaven. I created a life where I didn't need anyone to rescue me. And my family continued being my family. We celebrated holidays. We had dinners. We smiled for pictures. But there was always something underneath. Something unfinished. Then came the winter festival. Every year, our town held a celebration at the old community hall. There were lights everywhere, handmade decorations, music, and tables filled with food. That year was special because Ethan had just announced that he was expanding his company. My parents planned a surprise celebration for him. They rented the biggest room in the hall. They invited relatives. They prepared speeches. They gave him an expensive watch that my father said had been passed down through generations. Everyone applauded. Everyone smiled. And then my mother turned toward me. For a moment, I thought maybe this was finally my turn. Maybe after years of being the quiet one, they had something meaningful to say. She walked over with a small envelope. Just an old envelope with my name written on it. "Your grandfather left this for you," she said. The room became quiet for a second. My grandfather had passed away 2 years earlier. He was the person in my family who always treated me differently. He asked questions. He listened. He remembered things I said. He was the only person who made me feel like I wasn't invisible. I opened the envelope. Inside was the old key. And the note. Some things are meant to stay hidden until the right person finds them. I looked at my parents. They were watching me closely. Too closely. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't a random memory from my grandfather. This was something they had been waiting for me to discover. Something they hoped I would never ask. I took the key home that night. I placed it on my kitchen. And I stared at it for almost an hour. Because deep down, I already knew something. The key was not opening a door. It was opening a story. And my family had spent decades making sure I never heard it. The key stayed on my kitchen table for 5 days. I carried on with my normal routine. I went to work. I answered messages. I bought groceries. I smiled at people. But every night, I came home and looked at that small piece of metal sitting there, waiting. It bothered me because my grandfather was not the kind of person who did things without a reason. He was careful. Intentional. Every word he spoke had weight. So if he wanted me to find something, there was a reason. The question was why. And why now? On the 6th night, I finally decided to search. I started with the obvious places. Old family documents. My grandfather's belongings. The storage boxes my parents had kept after his death. Nothing. Then I remembered something. The key was old. Really old. Not like a modern house key. It looked like something from another time. A small brass key with a strange symbol carved into the handle. A symbol I had seen before. The same symbol that was engraved on the wooden box my grandfather kept locked in his study. I had always been curious about that box. When I was a child, I asked him what was inside. He smiled and told me. Things people forget are sometimes the things they need the most. I thought it was just one of his mysterious old man sayings. But now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't tell them why. I just said I wanted to look through some of Grandpa's things. My mother immediately became nervous. I noticed it. A tiny change in her expression. A pause before she answered. "You're still thinking about that key?" she asked. The fact that she already knew told me everything. I hadn't mentioned the key to anyone. Not once. "How do you know about the key?" I asked. She looked away. For the first time in my entire life, my mother looked like she didn't have an answer ready. "It's complicated, Claire." I hated those words. Because complicated usually meant someone else had decided I wasn't allowed to understand. "What is complicated?" I asked. She sighed. "Your grandfather had a lot of things from before we were a family." Before we were a family. That sentence stayed in my mind. Because what did that mean? Wasn't he always my grandfather? Wasn't that always our family? My mother tried to change the subject. She offered me coffee. Asked about work. Asked about my apartment. Normal questions. Normal conversation. But nothing felt normal anymore. Because once you realize someone is hiding something, every ordinary sentence starts sounding different. I waited until she left the room. Then I went upstairs. My grandfather's study was almost exactly the same as it had been when I was younger. The old wooden desk. The bookshelves. The smell of paper and dust. And in the corner, behind a stack of old newspapers, was the wooden box. The one I had spent years wondering about. My hands were shaking slightly when I inserted the key. It fit perfectly. The lock opened immediately. Inside were three things. A letter. A small envelope. And a photograph. The photograph was the same woman I had seen years earlier. But this time, there was something written underneath. A name. Evelyn Hart. And next to her was my grandfather. Not young. Not old. Just standing beside her like they had shared a life together. I opened the letter. It was written by my grandfather. And the first line made my entire body freeze. Claire, if you are reading this, then your parents finally decided you were ready. I read that sentence 3 times. Finally decided? Ready for what? I continued. My entire life, I have carried a truth that should never have been hidden from you. But I understand why your parents made the choice they did. That sentence hurt. Because suddenly I understood something. My parents weren't hiding one event. They were hiding a whole part of my family's history. The letter explained that before my grandfather met my grandmother, he had another life. A different one. A life nobody in the family talked about. Evelyn Hart had been his closest friend. But according to the letter, she was more than that. She was the person who helped him survive the hardest period of his life. When he lost everything. When his business failed. When everyone around him disappeared. She was the one who stayed. But then something happened. Something that changed their relationship forever. A decision. A secret. A promise. My grandfather wrote. I made a choice many years ago that affected more people than I understood at the time. Your parents believed protecting you from this story was the right thing. I believe you deserve the truth. I stopped reading. Because I realized something. My grandfather wasn't leaving me a confession. He was leaving me a warning. The second envelope was smaller. Inside was a document. A property record. My hands went cold when I saw the address. It was an old house outside Willowmere. A house I had never heard of. But the name attached to the property made everything even more confusing. The owner was listed as Claire Whitmore. My name. The house belonged to me. And I had never known it existed. I sat on the floor of my grandfather's study holding that paper, trying to understand what I was seeing. My grandfather had left me a house. A secret house. And my entire family had known about it. That was the moment I stopped wondering what they were hiding. I started wondering why they thought they had the right to hide it from me. I drove home without telling my parents what I found. For the first time in my life, I kept a secret from them. And strangely, it felt natural. That night, I searched the address online. There was almost no information. No photos. No listings. Nothing. Like the house had been erased. But one result appeared. An old newspaper article from 28 years earlier. The headline was, Local business owner donates historic property after unexpected disappearance. I clicked on it. And there was my grandfather's name. And underneath it was Evelyn Hart's name. The article said they had been connected to a mysterious property transfer. No explanation. No details. Just a sentence that made my heart race. The reason behind the transfer remains unknown. Unknown. Except now I knew one thing. My family knew. And they had been waiting almost 30 years for someone to find the key. I looked at the photograph again. At my grandfather standing beside Evelyn. At the house that somehow belonged to me. And I finally understood why my mother looked afraid when I mentioned the key. She wasn't afraid that I would find something. She was afraid that I would find out the truth. And the truth was much closer to me than anyone expected. I spent the entire night trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. That the house was a mistake. That the documents were old. That my grandfather had a reason for keeping everything hidden. But every explanation I created led to the same question. Why me? Why leave this to me and not my parents? Why wait until after he was gone? The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I lied to my family. I told my mother I had a busy week and wouldn't be able to visit. The truth was, I was driving to the address from the document. I needed to see the house. I needed to know if it was real. The road took me outside Willowmere, past the farms and old abandoned buildings, until the town disappeared behind me. The farther I drove, the stranger it felt. Because the place looked familiar. Not because I had been there. Because I had seen pieces of it before. In old family photos. In the background. A building behind my grandfather. A window. A garden. A place I never noticed because I never knew what I was looking at. After almost an hour, I found it. The house. It stood at the end of a narrow road surrounded by trees. It wasn't abandoned. That was the first thing that shocked me. The grass was cut. The windows were clean. Someone had been taking care of it. I parked outside and just sat there. Because suddenly the secret became real. This wasn't an old story. Someone had been maintaining this place. Someone new. I walked to the front door. The key from my grandfather's envelope fit perfectly. When the lock turned, I felt something I couldn't explain. Like I wasn't entering a house. Like I was entering a part of my own life that had been hidden from me. Inside, everything was preserved. Old furniture. Family books. Paintings. Letters. It felt like someone had left 5 minutes ago. Then I saw the wall. Hundreds of photographs. And in the middle of them was one picture that made me stop breathing for a second. It was me. Not a childhood picture my parents had. A picture from when I was 6 years old. I was standing in front of this exact house. Holding the hand of my grandfather. I had no memory of being there. None. I stared at the photo for several minutes. Because that meant one thing. My family hadn't just hidden this house from me. They had hidden memories from me. I walked deeper into the house. On a desk in the next room, I found a journal. The cover was damaged. The pages were old. But the handwriting was familiar. My grandfather's. The first entry was dated 29 years earlier. I made a promise to Evelyn that her family would never lose this place. I froze. Evelyn. The woman from the photograph. I kept reading. The journal explained that Evelyn was not just someone from my grandfather's past. She was his business partner. Together, they built the antique shop that everyone believed my grandfather created alone. But when the business became successful, something happened. A disagreement. A betrayal. A decision that divided two families. And then came the part that changed everything. Evelyn had a daughter. A daughter who disappeared from Willowmere when she was young. A daughter nobody in my family ever mentioned. A daughter connected to this house. I turned the page. And there it was. A name. The same name written on a document hidden inside the box. The same name my grandfather had underlined. The name was Rebecca Whitmore. My mother. I stopped. Because I thought I had misunderstood. I read it again. Rebecca. My mother. The journal continued. Rebecca believes the truth would destroy everything she built. She believes Claire would hate her if she knew. I felt my stomach drop. My mother wasn't just someone who knew the secret. She was part of it. I kept reading. And slowly, the story of my family began changing. My mother had not grown up with my grandfather. She had been adopted. And the woman everyone called my grandmother was not her biological mother. Evelyn Hart was. My entire family history was built on something nobody wanted me to discover. My grandfather had spent years trying to fix the damage. He bought this house back. He protected Evelyn's legacy. And he planned to tell me everything. But he never got the chance. The final pages of the journal were written only weeks before he died. The handwriting became weaker. The sentences shorter. But the message was clear. Claire, families are not created by blood alone. They are created by the people who choose to stay. But secrets have a way of hurting the people they are meant to protect. I closed the journal. And for the first time I understood why my grandfather left this to me. Not because I was the oldest. Not because I was the favorite. Because I was the only person in the family who had never been given a reason to protect the lie. I was the one person who could see the truth without defending it. But before I could leave, I noticed something else. A small wooden box under the desk. Another lock. Another keyhole. And next to it was a note. Not from my grandfather. From my mother. The handwriting was unmistakable. Claire, if you found this, then I already know I failed. I stood there in that hidden house, holding a letter from my mother that she never intended me to read. And suddenly, the secret became bigger than the house. Bigger than my grandfather. Bigger than Evelyn. Because now I knew the truth had been hidden by the person who raised me. And whatever was inside that final box was the reason my mother spent 30 years making sure I never found this place.